Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our special coverage on Kuwait Television as we continue to follow up on the latest developments surrounding the ongoing regional tensions and their wider implications for the Middle East. The situation continues to evolve rapidly, with security, diplomatic, and strategic dimensions unfolding across the region. Governments and international actors are closely monitoring the developments, while efforts are ongoing to prevent further escalation and to maintain regional stability. In times like these, understanding the broader strategic context is essential. Beyond the immediate events on the ground, analysts and policymakers are closely examining what these developments could mean for regional security, international relations, and the balance of power within the Middle East. To help us explore these issues in greater depth, we're joined in the studio by journalist Yousef Ghazaleh, who has visited us several times now, I believe.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us, Yousef. When we first started covering this, you joined us about 2 weeks ago, I'd say. I'd asked you, does this mean the war is over, given the current circumstances then?
Yeah.
Clearly, there's been a lot of developments. No one knows what to expect. How long, currently, given what we've seen, do you think this war can go for?
I think we're looking at a few more weeks. Obviously, there is the X factor of the man in the White House, Donald Trump, could tomorrow snap his fingers, say, hey, we've won, Iran has unconditionally surrendered, whether they've said so or not, and then say, we're bringing our boys home. And that's going to rely on a lot of his own considerations regarding, for example, midterm elections, how things are going economically with the impact of oil, and these are all things we'll get into in this conversation, I'm sure. But provided Trump, with his wild card sort of persona, has the ability to unilaterally withdraw from the conflict, it could be over as soon as next week. But looking at the way things are going with neither side openly saying that they're open to negotiate at this moment, I think we're looking at a few more weeks at the minimum.
I'm not sure if you saw, but there was John Bolton, who was a very war hawk figure in Washington, D.C., who some people say Trump used in his cabinet in his previous administration to scare off certain players. Even he was interviewed and asked, should America apologize and admit this was a mistake? What do you have to say about that?
So apologies in international relations are rare and few and far between. And the most recent example of an apology is Masoud Pezeshkian, the president of Iran, apologizing to the Gulf states for attacking them. And that was about 2 weeks ago. And just the other day, we still have sirens, we still have drones, we still have rockets coming at our countries each and every single day. So apologies aren't really worth too much, and they're also very difficult to put out there in terms of the political capital that you have to spend to do so. So I'm not so sure about an apology, especially not from the White House. What I will say is, in terms of coming to the negotiation table, I do believe that it is easy for many analysts to point at the current situation and say, look, strategically speaking, this is as good as it's going to get. Let's cut our losses, make sure that no more American soldiers die, make sure that no more American consumers, from their point of view, right, in the United States, feel the impact on their wallets, because Americans do vote with their wallets, primarily. It could be a good moment at this time to cut losses and say, look, we destroyed the Navy, missile launchers are down 90%, let's call it a victory, let's head back home. I don't think that that's what the administration's thought process is. But again, only one man truly knows the thought process there.
Now, when Trump publicly states that striking Kharg Island, a strategic island for Iran, it may be repeated in his words just for fun, doesn't he seem to applying the madman theory in his approach to this intimidation? And who truly benefits from turning the Gulf into a military-free war zone, let's say?
Well, first of all, on the madman theory, right? The madman theory essentially in geopolitics is, I'm crazy, don't mess with me, to put it in layman terms. I don't think that applies here, because it implies a level of strategic ambiguity that I don't think this administration has a precedent for. When they were gathering force in the region prior to this war, they were beating the drum, they were shouting that they were coming in order to intimidate the Iranians into giving up and backing down, and that never happened. I think here what you're looking at is a disassociation from reality that Donald Trump is showing, in terms of the fact that he seems to believe that the war is going differently than what it actually is. And that's not to say that they haven't caused significant damage to Iran. Of course they have, right? Missile launches are down roughly about 90%. Drone strikes are around the same ballpark.
Yes.
But for him to say just for fun, I think is more for him to paint the picture of things are going so well that we're able to just essentially play a video game in terms of click the button, shoot the rocket, blow something else up on that island. I think it's very crass. I don't think it's the right way to approach this situation at the moment. We are in a war zone in this region right now. People are suffering, people are dying. I don't think it's the right rhetoric to use.
You mentioned this point of disassociation,
Yeah.
how Trump is seemingly disassociated from the realities of the world. We've seen throughout history when an empire collapses, at the peak of the collapse, or just the onset of the collapse, there's this level of disassociation, this sort of arrogance and a feeling of invincibility.
Yeah.
Do you think America is currently falling victim to that?
America is not a monolith. That's one thing to realize, right? And the current administration was put in power by roughly 30% of their population, maybe even just under that. What I will say, though, is yes, Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, them two specifically, others in the administration like Vance, Huckabee, they have shown an enormous amount of hubris in terms of even willing to flaunt international law, such as the actions in Venezuela, Greenland, what they've threatened with Cuba, and obviously also Iran, in terms of cowboy diplomacy that they've been enacting here. Even going so far as to start this action without congressional approval, right? That was the first vote within Congress was done days, if not weeks, after the first rockets hit Iran. So I do think that we are at this point of maximum hubris in terms of the United States administration. I don't know how much more it could get from here. We are just about a quarter of the way into Donald Trump's second term. So things could change from here. One big thing to look out for will be the midterm elections.
Now you mentioned the madman theory and how currently there is no greater strategy behind this madman approach. I would argue that he has been using this madman theory in his previous administration, only this time someone has seemingly called his bluff.
Potentially, right? I do think that this second term has been much more adventuristic than his first. And so I do think that perhaps because he knows that there won't be another term, I think despite his rhetoric about a third term, I don't think he's willing to push that envelope. I don't think he thinks he could get away with it, whereas the MAGA movement could continue with the heir apparent J.D. Vance. So whether or not it lines up with his first term, whether or not there's a sort of rhyme there between the two terms, I think that the madman theory that you're talking about doesn't really apply here, because I don't believe that Trump is exercising that degree of strategic thought in depth.
Now, if the U.S. intelligence confirms the resilience of the Iranian regime, what is the true end goal of this regime change war? Is it unrealistic? Is it possible? Is Trump repeating George Bush's mistake of invading Iraq?
Well, George Bush's mistake was a slightly different one in that there was actual boots on the ground, which is something we haven't yet seen in Iran, and that there's significant pushback against within the American military establishment in terms of boots on the ground. Iraq was an open desert, Iran is a mountain fortress. That's the first thing to note. There is a potential with a few thousand Marines being shipped to the region of, for example, maybe the Americans invading Kharg Island, which does, as you mentioned, account for 90% of Iran's oil exports due to the fact that the island is the only, or one of the few spots on the Iranian coastline with enough deep water surrounding it for the oil tankers to come up and take the oil. That's a potential of boots on the ground. But I think the mistake that the Donald Trump administration has fallen into is that they've been almost duped into this war in many ways by the Israeli entity. And this was said as much by Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio said that the Americans had to start the war because otherwise the Israeli occupation would attack first and America would lose the strategic initiative to be able to join in on the fight. Like this, they saw as a preemptive strike, probably history's first preemptive strike ever, to beat their allies to the punch rather than their enemies to the punch. And so I think that in that sense, we've really seen evidence to support this in terms of the ever-changing goals of the war, because at first it was a regime change war, potentially with putting in the son of the former Shah. Then it became about Iran's nuclear weapons program, which supposedly was obliterated last year in June. Then it became about Iran's navy, strangely enough. This is after bullets had started flying and bombs had started falling. And now, depending on where you look, there's different numbers and different goals being stated. So, for example, in doing research for my own work, what I found on the Department of War's website was 3 stated goals. If you go on X, for example, you'll find 4 stated goals. Other places, you'll find up to 9. And there's a difference in the goals depending on where you look. So, for example, on the Department of War website, the 3 goals are the crippling of Iran's nuclear program, which so far, at least, no amount of bombs has been able to touch. Iran is sitting on, I forget the figure in terms of how much of it, but enough 60% enriched uranium
Yes.
to construct roughly 10 to 15 weapons if it was enriched to 90%, which is the amount needed for nuclear weapons. Whether or not there is a weapons program, they are sitting on that uranium. So that is worth noting. But beyond that goal, the destruction of Iran's navy was another stated goal, which again wasn't one at the start of the war. And the crippling of Iran's drone and missile launch capabilities, which yes, we've seen a degradation in that, especially in terms of the attacks onto the Gulf, which, alhamdulillah, because we are just bystanders in this war. But in that sense, we are kind of now at a guessing game where which of the goals are the administration really going to stick to, right? Because with the mostly destroyed Iranian navy, there are still reports of Iran using mine layers to mine the Strait of Hormuz. With the Iranian drone and missile launch capabilities, there are still launches happening. They're just less. And with the nuclear question, the uranium hasn't been touched yet as far as intelligence reports go. So we really need to see where the goals sort of line up, how far they can get to until Donald Trump can claim the victory that he wants to claim.
In terms of the degradation of missile and drone attacks, we are seeing a reduced wave or frequency of these attacks. But in turn, we're also seeing a reduced wave and in interception rates. We're also seeing that there seems to be a very systematic approach to Iran's attacks. We saw a couple days ago they destroyed 5 to 7 refueling planes. Just yesterday or the day before, they destroyed 4 E-3 radar planes, which now leaves American fighters blind flying through Iran, unable to detect and plan out their routes to hit their targets. As you were mentioning, there's discord and disarray in the administration, in the goals and the rhetoric coming from the different members. Between these two sides, who do you believe is more in control of the current conflict?
Control is an interesting word, right? Because depending on how you look at it, either one could claim they're in control, right? The United States and Israeli occupation do, in my opinion, or in my belief based on what I've seen, they do probably have control over the skies of Iran in terms of operational, freedom of operation, excuse me. Iran probably has more control of the strategic situation in terms of its position having closed off the Strait of Hormuz, for a while being able to still export its oil, although that now with the bombing of Kharg Island is probably going to come to an end. So it really depends on the war you're fighting, right? And Iran and America and the Israeli occupation are all fighting different wars with different objectives. And so it again depends on how you slice the cake. I think that Iran right now, strategically speaking, is probably in a lot of control in terms of people have rallied around the flag. The regime does look to be in a solid state where it probably won't fracture, it probably won't collapse on its own. Whereas the United States is now having to deal with the economic and physical cost of the war. And this brings me to something else, which is the appetite for suffering of civilians in each place, right? Because in Iran, especially if we look at it since, even before the revolution in 1979, there was a revolution for a reason.
Yes.
In terms of people's lives, quality of living was not good. And they took to the streets and they overthrew their government. And that was, as we mentioned before on this program, a multi-factional revolution that ended up with the Islamists in power. It wasn't an Islamic revolution.
Correct.
But since then, less than a year after 1979, Saddam Hussein invades Iran. You have an 8-year-long war with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of deaths on both sides, extremely brutal war. And beyond that, then the whole time dealing with sanctions, up to last year being bombed, and this year again being bombed. The Iranian people are resolute, and they do have thousands of years of national history to tie them together. Whereas when you look at the United States, it's very easy to sort of, if the economy is wounded, put your finger in the wound, increase the pain, and in that way, increase pressure on the government. And so I think that's really going to come into play as things start to stretch out.
Now, leaks point to a dangerous rift. Trump wants this lightning-fast, entertaining war, a quick strike and call it a day, to restore his popularity before the 2026 elections and to avoid the lame duck label. While the Israeli occupation planned for a long war of attrition to sort of drain and tire out all the regional actors to leave them as the single sphere of influence.
Yes.
Are we facing a conspiracy of division of roles between the U.S. and the Israeli occupation to drain out our oil and financial resources?
Well, so I want to break that question down, right? Because the first half of that question is the strategic fork in the road between the Americans and the Israeli occupation, whereby the Americans, as you said, want a quick war, in and out, shock and awe, as they like to say. That's come and gone. We've crossed the 2-week mark. This war started unpopular. It stayed unpopular. Nobody really trusts the rhetoric that the government is putting out there. And really the only victories that they're able to claim are the quantifiable ones, for example, of the reduction of missile and drone launches. But even then, there are still casualties that people are going to have to reckon with. In the Israeli occupation point of view, you're absolutely right. The longer the current war continues, the weaker the occupation's neighbors become, the stronger its regional position becomes, and specifically the top, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he's able to push back his corruption trial, for example, push for a pardon if he can secure a victory, which is something he's been trying to do since October 7th.
We've seen Trump even call for that.
Yes, we've seen Trump, exactly. And so you can see that in this sense of having a permanent crisis where he himself is positioned as the savior of his nation, this is working out just fine for him. And this kind of brings us back to what I was mentioning earlier in terms of the larger strategic output, or larger strategic vision, excuse me, is that I don't think that Trump was exercising a madman theory, because there isn't the foresight to do so, because America was pushed into this war by the Israeli occupation.
So would you say America is sort of trading off these tactical successes for a greater strategic victory? And this in turn will allow Iran to achieve a strategic victory against the US?
Well, strategic victories are often subjective. I think as long as Iran survives, it'll claim a strategic victory. For them, they view this as a war of existence. For America and for Trump, I think the strategic victory comes from the fact that he can claim enough of destruction towards the Iranians to be able to continue to bring back actually some trust and popularity to his party. The midterm elections are coming up on November 3rd, and we've seen already with recent elections in the States, if Trump's not on the ticket, Republicans are tending to lose right now.
Correct.
And there's a weird crossroads within the party whereby they can either in 2028 go down the road of J.D. Vance, which is continuity for the MAGA base, or Marco Rubio, who, whether it's true or not, stands for the sort of moderate Republicans, the sort of, just like back in the day, John McCain, that sort of return to, I guess, normalcy in politics, which we've forgotten about since 2016.
Which is strange to call that normalcy, given its
nature. It is. But normalcy is relative, I guess.
Yeah, true. Well, look, with regional assessments of the current response, particularly Trump's call for international coalitions to help and reopen the Strait of Hormuz and the internationalization of this crisis, does this speak to the American power and their projection of power? Because if he was able to do this, the Strait of Hormuz would be open by now. But we see him calling out to France, England, even to China and Russia. He had a phone call with Putin just a few days ago.
Well, I think this kind of points to what I was mentioning again earlier about strategy, and that America was not strategically prepared for this war, and that there is no vision in terms of what comes beyond the next bombing round. Because when you look at it, this is coming just days, maybe a week after Trump insulted the United Kingdom for sending its ships to the region, saying they're sending help after the war was already won. Now he's turned around and said, hey, come help us open the Strait of Hormuz.
Help us win this war.
Yeah, help us win this war, exactly. And so from that sense, I think it shows where America's thought process is at, or where the administration's thought process is at, of where the war is. I think it's also a move to reduce the growing diplomatic isolation that the United States has because of this war. Not to call it isolation by any way, shape, or form. There's no such thing as sanctions or anything else levied against the United States. What I mean more so is the rift that's coming up because many European powers are refusing to back the war. Germany, which has been one of the most vocally supportive of the war, just stated today, just an hour ago, that they will not be joining in the fight. And so it shows where the United States is and what they're trying to do in terms of bringing their allies into the fold so that they're all on a united front again, which they haven't been really since the start of Trump's second term.
And we even see this with the Russian-Ukraine crisis, how he's pushing the NATO members to increase their spending to pay more for this war so that it isn't just America carrying the bill. Yeah. Do we see, you mentioned that there are no sanctions against America, but there is a growing rift. Does this crisis currently open the possibility to nations pressuring and sanctioning America to force them to let go of this conflict, a needless war?
Well, I don't think sanctions are really on the table. I don't think that's beneficial to the world economy in terms of the fact that America has, since the end of the Second World War, essentially positioned itself as the hub or one of the hubs for the global economy. I don't think that's really realistic at this moment. And then on the NATO point, America has been pushing for its NATO allies to raise their spending in terms of percentage of GDP since the beginning of the Ukraine war in 2022, perhaps even just a little bit before that, and Trump has been a very vocal critic of that. So I think those 2 points kind of exist independently of this current war. In terms of economic pressures on America to end the war, I don't think those come from the rest of the world. I think those come from the strategic situation right now happening in the Strait of Hormuz.
Now, the Vietnam trap, we spoke about this 2 weeks ago, yeah. Will the United States be drawn into a protracted war of attrition for which was, like you mentioned, totally unprepared? There was no grand strategy, especially given the lack of a clear plan for the aftermath of this crisis.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that there's... well, the thing with Vietnam, right, is again, it goes back to the appetite of cost. Vietnam led to about, if I recall correctly, about 45,000 American deaths.
Roughly.
Roughly. And the average age there was, I believe, around 19, 20 years old. They were kids.
Yeah.
And which, again, just added to the weight of the deaths in the eyes of the American public. Here, we're talking about 10 casualties rather than 45,000. Not to diminish them at all, but to say that we're not looking at a Vietnam-style entrapment here, although the zeitgeist back in America will probably draw those historic parallels, just because America tends to look at the last war it fought through, look at the current war it fought through the lenses of the last few wars it fought. The more apt parallels are probably going to be Iraq and Afghanistan, and even then, those involved boots on the ground, which this doesn't. I don't think there's a possibility of America invading Iran fully. Perhaps the islands that are in the Gulf as bargaining chips, but I do think that the American military itself is able to push back on Donald Trump enough that they won't go for a full-on invasion of a mountainous country like Iran, which has staved off invasions before.
But this pushback that you're talking about, it needs to happen quick, because we are hearing reports about the USS Tripoli, amphibious assault group, as well as, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's the 82nd Airborne Brigade. They're being deployed and mobilized. They've canceled their training.
Yes.
Reports are claiming that they will be used to, let's say, invade Kharg Island. Some analysts are saying that they may invade mainland Iran to try to locate the enriched uranium. Now, the 82nd Airborne Brigade can control a sizable amount of land, but it won't be for days. They can control it for a couple hours, maybe half of a day, and it will take a lot more than that to find this enriched uranium.
Yeah, well, so that to me is where the argument doesn't really hold water, because wars are won on logistics, and this uranium is not just hidden, it's going to be guarded. When you're talking about an invasion force for a country against a country like Iran, you're probably talking about a minimum of 500,000 troops.
Correct.
And so that would take weeks, if not months, of very public buildup. We are in an age now of satellites, an age of social media. The buildup for something like this, I mean, we don't even have to guess, right? Before the invasion of Ukraine, we saw the buildup of Russian troops around Western Russia as well as in southern Belarus. So the signs aren't quite pointed to that. We do have obviously military movements, as you've said, which leads me to believe that the most likely outcome is either they're going to reinforce bases in the Gulf region, which may or may not happen, or they do plan on invading Kharg Island, just because that does offer a huge strategic bargaining chip that can be used against the Iranian government, because once they're there, I don't believe Iran has the power to dislodge them, except for perhaps bombarding them with missiles, which would be a costly and very controversial process because America could hit them back.
Now, that was my next question for you. We've seen the U.S. attack Kharg Island. If they invade the island and take control, do you believe Iran maybe just will destroy all the oil infrastructure there as an attempt to say, if we can't have it, then no one can have it?
It's definitely a possibility, but I think that the one thing to note as well with this oil infrastructure is that Kharg Island is not the drill site. It's not the oil field, right? Correct. And so it's of limited use regardless, right? The most strategically useful thing about taking it on the American perspective is that Iran then doesn't have it. So you just add another level of economic pressure onto the Iranian government and Iranian people, because then that brings us back to way in the beginning of the war, the idea that Trump wanted the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow the government in exchange for either chaos or a government more malleable to American and Israeli demands. So I don't think that there's that much benefit in destroying the infrastructure. I do think, though, that there would be significant blowback from the Iranians in terms of drone attacks and things of that nature, leading to more American military fatalities.
Now, you spoke about this earlier when we interviewed you a couple days ago. What is Iran's asymmetric strategy against Washington and the Gulf allies in the region, and why does Iran consider it an existential war? You've touched on this a bit.
Yes, but I'm more than happy to talk about it again because it's essentially the reason why we're sitting in these chairs. Iran is hitting us because it believes, and this is in no way excusing it, because I think that even in the lens of their rationale, I think they've gone too far. It believes that if it hits American military installations in the GCC, for example, American bases in Kuwait, American base in Qatar, that, or the American fleet in Bahrain, that it is able to then, due to less geographic distance between us here in the Khalij, as well as the fact that our air defenses, while indeed very powerful, they've proven themselves more than capable, are not on the technological level of, let's say, the Iron Dome. They believe us to be softer targets to be able to attack the American bases. The idea then being that we would pressure the Americans to stop the bombing campaign. It's the same deal with the Strait of Hormuz, where now, as we are the ones that will be mostly suffering from the embargo in terms of our oil output, in terms of government revenue, we would then again put pressure on the United States. The idea being why this is called asymmetric is because it means if we're boxing and you're punching me in the face, I'm instead calling your manager. Okay. You know what I mean? Yeah. So in that sense, on a purely strategic level, you can somewhat see the rationale. The problem is that Iran has then now targeted several points of civilian infrastructure. For example, the airport in Kuwait multiple times, DXB multiple times, recently a residential building in Mangaf, I believe. And so this is where things become a little more confusing. I don't understand why they would go after these bits of civilian infrastructure. To my best guess, they're trying to cause enough fear to again add that layer on us pressuring the United States, but I don't think they're any way, shape, or form justified in doing that. I think it crosses several red lines.
Now, you would imagine that these attacks would isolate Iran, and maybe they are currently isolating them, but from the Gulf we are seeing they are not removing their ambassadors, they're not calling them persons non grata. They're in fact intensifying diplomatic reach out and dialogue between the two. This may be due to the wise history of diplomacy in the region, understanding that these wars end on a negotiating table regardless. So would you say that our response is to maintain ties, to keep a route of de-escalation open?
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head. I do think that the spirit of the Gulf states has always been diplomatic in nature. Like, I mean, look at Kuwait. Kuwait, speaking in terms of the Gulf, was a diplomatic pioneer. We were the first Gulf state to have relations with China, for example. We were constantly through the Cold War able to have relations with both the Eastern and Western blocs. We've always punched above our weight, diplomatically speaking, and so I think this is us leaning into what we know. This is us leaning into our strengths and also leaning into our morals, because while the bullets and rockets are flying, here we are still maintaining cool heads, negotiating, doing what we do best in order to maintain the one thing that matters, which is our own prosperity and our own peace and safety.
Now, in terms of peace and safety and our own stability, how do you interpret the lack of action from countries around the region to find a serious initiative to resume the negotiations? And have these countries lost the ability to pressure Washington? As you mentioned, Iran's asymmetric strategy is to pressure Gulf and Arab nations to therefore pressure the U.S. to call off this war. How do you interpret the actions or inaction?
So we've seen regional condemnation. Abdel Fattah Sisi, president of Egypt, for example, offered his words of condemnation. Erdogan has also offered, president of Turkey has offered his condemnation. Condemnation is obviously a good first step, but we do need to see some more support, or we'd like to see some more support, maybe materially to the GCC, as currently we are right now the bystander caught in the crossroads of all of this. We have refused to allow Americans to use our airspace to attack Iran, and so I think we're absolved of any reason the Iranian regime could concoct to attack us in any way, shape, or form. I don't think there's any legitimacy to the reasons they're giving to attacking us. What I will say as well, though, is specifically because your question regards negotiations, what we have seen is that neither side of Iran or the United States or the Israeli occupation is willing to come to the negotiating table right now. Iran does not want to put itself in a position of looking weak in terms of coming to the negotiating table. right after the war started, off the back of a potential or an alleged breakthrough in the negotiations. We can't forget, and this is the second time this has happened. Last year in June, the war started during negotiations. So for Iran, that is not something that they're willing to entertain right now, because the last two times that it happened, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me.
True.
There's no fool me three times in their eyes. The Israeli occupation, as we've said, are not interested in an end to the hostilities at this moment. They're not the ones bearing the full brunt of the war they started. We are, and to a lesser extent the American military is, in terms of the deaths that they've been experiencing.
Unfortunately, Yousef, we are quickly running out of time, but I'll ask you this last question before we let you go. In light of the talk about defensive policy reviews and reviewing and reassessing our international relations, has this war driven the final nail in the coffin of total dependence on American bases? And will we witness a genuine revival of joint Gulf defense projects free from any external influence?
On a personal level, I truly hope that this is a wake-up call for the Gulf, that while we have enjoyed protection from the United States, and we do have to lodge appreciation for the historic role America has, especially in Kuwait, not just in terms of our liberation, but also I work as an archivist, and looking at the old newspapers from the 1990s following liberation, there was genuine fear of a follow-up invasion from the north. The American presence here was one of the things that assuaged those fears and also made sure that Kuwait was in a stable security position. So we do have to acknowledge that. But yes, this war has taught us, as well as Donald Trump's second term in general, has taught us that the world order as we know it is A, unreliable, unstable, and B, it's non-static. And so the main thing we can rely on is ourselves. And as a singular Gulf defensive unit, I do believe that the entire GCC would be much more secure.
Well, Mr. Yousef, I appreciate that answer. I do believe as well that it's time to reassess the realities of the world. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for you in this segment. Thank you once again for joining us and enlightening the viewers on the realities on the ground.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, as tensions continue to escalate across the Middle East, the role of the United States remains central to the unfolding developments. Washington has been closely involved in the military and diplomatic dimensions of the crisis, while also coordinating with partners in the region and beyond. More on that in this report.
The